For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon Durayhove. Mfundo Hlachwayo, a research associate with the South African Institute of International Affairs, joins me to discuss why the African Growth and Opportunity Act is more critical than ever to both African and US economies. Welcome.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you for having me.
Now, South Africa's Trade and Industry Minister, Dr. Rob Davies, has been tirelessly arguing South Africa's case for an unfettered renewal of the US's African Growth and Opportunity Act. What benefit could this have for South Africa in future?
I'd just like to start off by saying that South Africa and the US have a strong, deep economic relationship. I think that should be our point of departure. The benefits which South Africa and the African economies benefit from the African Growth Opportunity Act is significant. It is estimated that there are over 350,000 jobs which have been created by this act. South Africa exports a great deal of its manufactured good, diverse manufactured goods to the U.S. This leads to job creation. It leads to increased investment in our economy. So there are many quantifiable aspects that the African Growth Opportunity Act has for South Africa.
Now, U.S. President Barack Obama, on his recent visit to the continent this past June, declared his administration's ardent support for the extension of AGOA. However, it's not up to his administration to make this important decision, but rather U.S. Congress. How do you think Rob Davies should be presenting South Africa's case?
You're absolutely right, Shannon. It is not the U.S. administration which decides the future of the African Growth Opportunity Act. It is the U.S. Congress, which is made up of the U.S. Senate as well as the U.S. House of Representatives. Thus far, let me just start and say Dr. Davies just recently returned from his U.S. trip, where he took his top aides. Basically, it was an information gathering and sharing exercise. And there the message was that South Africa would like to see the renewal of AGOA, seamless renewal, meaning no significant changes. While he was there, he met with U.S. congressmen, he met with U.S. business representatives, and he also met with think tanks, which in the U.S. are very influential. They provide a lot of the research to the U.S. Congress and also to other lobbying groups. So what I think he's done thus far is what South Africa needs to do. However, I think more needs to be done. I think perhaps through his leadership, South Africa should have a forum where it gathers African economies, the ones which benefit from AGOA, and perhaps do a mission to the U.S., this information sharing and gathering mission, as a collective group. Because there are a number of other organizations and lobby groups which are lobbying and advocating for a different type or style of AGOA, where perhaps all LDCs, lesser developed economies, are roped into AGOA, or where the AGOA continues for the African economies, but may see South Africa out of it. I think another perhaps good tool which the DTI could utilize is to actually empower South African business to go and lobby on their own. Currently, government to government should not be lobbying or advocating. That's why they call it an information sharing exercise, is what they've been doing. But South African business can lobby. They can pay lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Who are very knowledgeable about the Congress, how it works, how you get your voice heard. I think that's an exercise which the DTI, through the leadership of Dr. Davies, should take upon, is to empower South African business, organize them to go lobby for the extension of AGOA, with South Africa included.
Talking about lobby groups now, some have been very vocal about the fact that South Africa, as a middle-income country, should be graduated out of AGOA when the Act expires in September 2015. What's your opinion on that?
There are a number of lobby groups, and some here on the African continent, which have we understand have been lobbying for South Africa to be excluded. Perhaps they're missing there's a larger agenda to what AGOA can do for the African economy, and that is regional integration. To give you an example, the automotive industry, they receive their rubber from Malawi, and in turn make the tires here in South Africa, and then that of course goes into the vehicle which is exported to the United States. That creates jobs in Malawi. It improves regional infrastructure because now you have to have your roads, your ports, and so forth functioning properly. So it was discouraging to hear that one or two southern African countries has been lobbying for South Africa to be removed. I do not believe South Africa should be removed or graduated out of AGOA. South Africa is the case for a successful AGOA country or beneficiary. The reason I say that is if you remove oil or energy exports to the U.S., South Africa is the leading exporter to the U.S. under AGOA. And therefore, it is a case where you have seen the production here in South Africa be successful and be competitive in the U.S. So therefore, to say now you have been successful in utilizing this legislation or scheme, we're going to graduate you out, it doesn't give incentive for other countries to leverage and basically utilize it to its foremost. So
as soon as they then improve,
they'll be graduated out. So right. So it's a case, I think, for others to follow, and emulate.
What could happen to South Africa's economy if it was excluded from AGOA?
It's difficult to extrapolate what the real impact would be. The fixed investments from, let's say, a GM, a BMW, or Mercedes-Benz, the capital expenditure is so deep, you would not see those factories shut down. What perhaps you might see is those firms looking for other markets if AGOA was to be, if South Africa was to be graduated out. They would seek other markets. Perhaps what you would see is that they would not invest in further expansion here, so you'll see less investment in South Africa. But to put a figure on it and say what would be the economic impact is very difficult. We do know that AGOA contributes to 2.8% of South Africa's manufacturing industry. So you might see that 2.8% basically evaporate.
Finally, how much trade does South Africa do with the US, and is this likely to be affected if AGOA isn't extended?
South Africa's trade with the US, I believe, is around, in US dollars, it's 15 billion US dollars, so 150 billion rand. That's two-way trade. South Africa's exports to the US is 76 billion rand. And the U.S. exports to South Africa, slightly less than that, but in the same range. So you see that relationship is a very diverse but equal relationship. What you also get is South Africa's manufactured products being exported to the U.S. As I just stated, it's the second largest market destination for South Africa's good, just behind China. And China only just recently overtook the U.S. It overtook the U.S., I believe, in 2010. But our exports to China fairly in commodities and raw materials.
Thank you very much for your time and insight.
Thank you, Shannon.
That was Mfundo Hlatshwayo, Research Associate at the South African Institute of International Affairs, discussing the African Growth and Opportunity Act.